critical issues are in Nigeria's power sector. Market efficiency is most likely response, and rightly so. Nigeria consumes over $9 billion annually in inefficient energy practices and have the potential to save up to $4 billion if the power challenge is solved. Today we are here to identify and analyze sustainable solutions most critical to the survival of the sector and to commit to ensuring these solutions are implemented. My name is David Arinze. On behalf of the Nextier party, I welcome you to this epoch-making event. We appreciate your presence and continuous work towards experiencing sustainable progress in the power sector. Today's Nextier Power Dialogue Captive Power seeks to discuss tariff framework for captive generation in Nigeria, examine the potential for future investment in captive generation, educate Nigerians on the development potential and applicability of captive generation, discuss available and potential investment opportunities in captive generation, examine the potential challenges and risk factors in developing captive power in Nigeria, review lessons learned from existing captive power generators in Nigeria, and finally, understand the technological and economic viability of captive generation, especially based on states' economic viability with industrial clusters. I implore you to have an open mind, listen attentively, think, ask insightful questions, and contribute. Taking us through the rest of this event, let us welcome the moderator, Muyiwa Abiodun, with a round of applause. Muyiwa Abiodun is a seasoned mechanical and electrical project manager with experience working on commercial, industrial, and residential projects. Before joining the Vice President's Advisory Power Team, he served as a senior utility infrastructure manager, developing projects ranging from an 18 megawatt independent power plant to an 8 million liter water works project. In his capacity as head advisory power team in the office of the Vice President, he leads his team of highly specialized experts to provide power sector related advice to His Excellency, the Vice President. He has led his team to ensure that information and data in the power sector is clear and accurate. This led to the development of the power sector dashboard, which has now become a central source of data for about 500 power stakeholders and participants. With a round of applause again, please welcome Muyiwa Abiodun as speaker.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're welcome to the June 2018 edition of the Nextier Power Dialogue. Please join me in welcoming the panelists who will discuss how captive power generation will help unlock Nigeria's economy. First, I would like to invite Mrs. Agatha Naji. Please join me in welcoming her. Mrs. Naji is the MD of Geometric Power. Geometric is a pioneer private sector developer of power generation and distribution assets in Nigeria. Ms. Naji is a multiple award nominee and winner in the power sector and beyond. She's also the first female managing director of a power development private sector company in Nigeria. She has mentored and encouraged several young female engineers as well as non-engineers to join the power industry in Nigeria. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Naji. Second, I'd like to invite my good friend Ebi Clark. Please join me. Ebi is a senior special assistant on energy and power at Central Bank of Nigeria. Ebi has served in various notable capacities in the power sector, especially as senior consultant in the Nigerian Infrastructure Advisory Facility, NIAF, and as a senior performance manager at the Presidential Task Force on Power, PTFP. Thank you for joining us, Ebi. Certainly, I'd like to welcome Mr. Jide Onokoya. Please join me, welcome. Mr. Jide Onokoya, I hope I'm right with Dr. Mr. I can't see. He's responsible for driving business growth aggressively and championing new business opportunities, capital investments initiatives, operational improvements, and strategy alignment across power and gas infrastructure at Axela. Prior to joining Axela, Jide was the acting CEO and the director EPC at Negris Limited. At Negris, he was responsible for the oil and gas service and power EPC business. Prior to Negris, Jide worked as a senior controls engineer and a Six Sigma Black Belt at Bechtel Corporation, where he focused on project execution and project risk analysis. Please join me again and welcome Jide. Thank you. First, I'd like to invite Mr. Jide Onokoya to talk about how captive generation will unlock Nigeria's economy. We'd like to focus on feasibility of power sources across states and opportunities for development.
Thank you. Everyone, again, my name is Jide Onokoya. I work for Axela Limited, and I'm primarily responsible for business development in power and gas infrastructure. Today, the topic is on captive power, and if you don't mind, I think it's the first to come up. Just a quick definition on the differences between captive, embedded, and grid-based power. Just a general. Captive would be power where you're not connected to any distribution network or national grid, and the power is mostly used by the person generating the power themselves, which will be different from an embedded power, which would be putting an IPP within the distribution network of a distribution company. And then, of course, the last level being a grid-connected power plant that is connected to the national grid that provides power for each of the 11 distribution companies in Nigeria. Now, decentralized power in Nigeria has a rich history. We found some sources say we have between 8 to 14 gigawatts of power that is being self-generated in Nigeria today, versus the close to 4 gigawatts of power that comes through our transmission network. Of this, 86% of companies, some sources say, own or share the generator using their own self-power, like diesel or other means. And over 48% of these companies generate their powers privately. All in all, in 2017, we found that about $243 million was spent on diesel generators or on companies looking to self-generate their power. The takeaway from this is there's an existing market to bring in captive power going into the future. Now, to bring this home a little bit, Axela, if you don't know, was formerly Oando Gas and Power. We recently got bought over by Helios Investment Partners last year, and Oando divested close to 75% of the share of Oando Gas and Power to Helios, and thus the new name Axela, which is the flag was today. Now, Axela, we were lucky enough to work in the captive market in Lagos State by building the Akute power plant. Akute was a power plant that's tied to the Lagos State Water Corporation. What we found was Lagos State has an initiative to self-generate its power. And in looking at Akute, we were able to develop a 12 megawatt IPP that would help the Water Corporation continue to develop, generate its own power and develop water for the citizens of Lagos State. What we found that is by focusing on places that have revenue generating sources like a water corporation with its own cash flows, it can self-sustain itself, provide its own power, and provide the greater good to the people of the state. Now, there's some factors that allow this to work. One being gas supply availability, and then also by collecting, generating more revenues, the Water Corporation is generating increased IGR for the state, which is positive. Going on Akute as an example of a captive power plant that is self-sustaining today and generates money for the state, we had some lessons learned and quite a few challenges on that opportunity. For one, some of the lessons learned that we find today that the states like, at least as we're trying to focus development of these captive plants for states going forward, you have a certainty of your tariff, which is different from an embedded or a grid-based plant that tariffs can be set arbitrarily by someone else. By developing your own power plant, you have certainty of tariff, and you can look forward knowing how much you have to pay on a go-forward basis. Secondly, if your captive plant is big enough and you can generate, scale it up to a combined cycle plant, you may be able to provide heat and sell this heat to the industries in your clustered area and minimize your loss of transmission, because now you're in a captive situation. You have more power to sell to a clustered group of companies or individuals. Furthermore, some of the other things that you have control over is you're now in full control of your power plant, which means you can increase or reduce your load as you will versus relying on the grid to provide you power, which can go off at any time and impact your business. Now, the lastly being your security of supply, which is you're in full control of the power that you're providing into your own entity as a captive plant or to the industries clustered around you if you're in an industrial cluster zone. Now, the beauty of this is it can be replicated across many states. If Lagos State can do it for a water corporation that provides the citizenry with water, I believe if different states look at what specific sectors or industries that they would like to develop that make sense, be it textile, be it agriculture, and so on, these priority areas can be looked at as areas to self-generate cash flows for the state, self-generate the power that they need, and ultimately increase revenues for the state on a go-forward basis. With that as well, you have challenges. Some of the challenges that we find out there include your fuel source. We're lucky in Lagos that we have the ELPS, that's the Escobos Lagos pipeline system that brings gas in to Lagos. Although just being one pipeline, we would love redundant pipeline in the ELPS 2, which is coming up. But your fuel source reliability is an issue, and not all states have access to gas. But then, like I said, some states have agriculture. You have the options of going to biomass or other technologies that can continue to provide you this captive power and help grow your state. Coupled on to that is the price of gas. Today we have an issue with gas to power where you can get DSO gas at a certain price versus gas being sourced on a bilateral basis, which you would have to negotiate yourself. And then, of course, you have gas in the local distribution zones that are pegged and are sold at a certain price, above $7 today. Then you have your supply redundancy. I think I tried to mention that in the ELPS and the redundancy of supply of gas. Speaking mostly on gas because Axela Nwando, his sister company is GasLink. I have to say that GasLink is a franchisee of NGMC, and we provide gas into Greater Lagos. So redundancy of supply is important. And with this, part of the initiatives from Helios was to bring in a new initiative to provide liquefied natural gas into Lagos and into Nigeria as a whole, and also to develop a mini LNG plant at Ajaokuta to help serve our northern markets with liquefied natural gas, where gas pipelines today cannot get to. A few other challenges exist in your captive market, some being off-taker bankability. If you're trying to pull together a cluster of people, if you're not just self-generating for yourself, you need the creditworthiness of those off-takers to be good and well to be able to develop a bankable framework. And then, of course, single off-taker risk is always an issue. You don't want to be tied to one off-taker such that if one off-taker falls off, your entire power plant goes into the whole. So with that said, this is just a brief intro on our outlook on captive power in Nigeria, how the states can leverage on this potential growth areas within their states to provide captive power, and hopefully that can help self-generate some revenues in the state and also generate power for people that need it. Thank you.
I will now invite Mrs. Inaji to tell us about the social and industrial impact of captive power from her experience, how she thinks Nigeria benefits. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The discussion this evening, I believe he has touched on the key areas, which is how captive generation works. So for me, the impact, the social and impact on industries and the social aspect, right? Those are the two things you wanted me to talk about. Okay. Here's my thought on this. From a social perspective, when you have the captive generator producing power for just one location, the cost of running that generation plant, the cost of your O&M is transferred to the off-taker. What that does is that the shared costs that you would have achieved if you had a larger generation plant has a negative impact on your social environment. This can come about, when you're talking about the environmental pollution. It also affects everybody else when they're trying to develop their businesses, especially the SMEs. From your description, what we're doing in ABBA as generating power is an embedded generation, and that is correct, and the difference is clear. Basically what we're doing is to generate for an environment. Interestingly, when we did a study in ABBA about 2008-2009, we found out that we had over 80,000 diesel generators operating in ABBA alone. The social impact of that on the environment and the people in ABBA and the businesses in ABBA is huge. So when you're looking at the possibility of having captive generation as a solution versus embedded generation as a solution, you need to look at the entire picture of the cost. Scale is important. So if you have, like he said, the water system in Lagos that will provide a social service to the people, that is a huge benefit socially. For a trading and market environment, the cost of that captive generation goes straight to the bottom lines of the off-takers and to you and I who will be buying their produce. So what I would like all of us to think about when it comes to the social and the industrial impact is, would captive generation be an ideal solution in our environment? Maybe. It depends on so many factors. One of those factors he mentioned is, what is the source of the fuel? In a farm environment, if you're using biomass, it would be great. We would use it to develop a rural environment, and that has a great positive outcome for everybody, farmers and you and I who eat their food. But if you're talking about something like compressed natural gas. You're now looking at things like the logistics of bringing it to the location of that captive power. You're looking at the security issues of transporting it along, our bad roads. You're looking at the actual cost of that compressed natural gas. You now have a question mark on the possibility of that particular captive generation being a positive outcome to the industries and to the people around the environment where it's going to be used. So my message is, in our environment, it is important that we look at every side of the equation. Consider whether we should go for the embedded generation or for the captive. Look at the costs, look at the dangers, look at the social impact on the people, look at the environmental damage it is going to cause before we determine which way to go. Having said that, it has its positives. You're able to solve the problem of the more immediate and more important things that will impact our lifestyles. Water, for example. Security lights is another. Wherever you have those from captive generation, especially in the States, you'll find out that the rate of crime reduces significantly. So there are goods and there are some other challenges with it. I would like to stop here. I would have preferred to talk about embedded generation because that's my baby, but we will take your questions and I'll share more information as the time comes and the opportunity comes.
We actually will talk about embedded a little bit as we go along, as we discuss. Lastly, last but not least, we'll invite Ebi to talk about generally how captive power will work, how when you think about tariff, raising finance to build captive power plants, regulation, how to do it right. Ebi will give his thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Muyiwa. I'll have to introduce myself. I'm not really an expert to talk on tariffs. I'm a banker. So we're more interested in regulating the financial sides than how the electricity market in itself. But it's very important to understand that in all these things, understanding the finance, understanding the commercials is incredibly important. One of the aspects that people don't know about captive power is that it's probably the most successful of the power sector interventions that the CBN has done via the Power and Aviation Intervention Facility. That's a 300 billion Naira. I mean, with the CBN, there's lots of money when you're sort of talking about power. I've got to make sure I get the right number. That's a 300 billion Naira facility shared between the power and aviation sectors. And it allows single-digit finance to go to IPP developers. What was found was that these are developers that work in industrial clusters who have particular and specific credit-worthy off-takers. Now, I said that bit very slowly because it's very critical. You have to get your money back. And this has been very successful. Of the 300 billion, I think it's all essentially been dispersed and the repayments have all been made. Typically what you have is an IPP developer working at sites like on airport, Ladol, I think there's one in one of the cement factories. So they have designed a plant for an off-taker who is interested in paying for reliable power. Now, if you have customers, no matter who they are, who are interested in paying for reliable power in a captive format, I think there really is no issue with getting money, but you really have to demonstrate that. It's very easy in industrial clusters to have a well-known name, but other captive solutions might go more into the general public. So you have now something that CBN is looking to work with REA are on, I think, what's called the energizing economies, where we're looking at various economic groups, be it agro-processors or marketers. And once again, it's very important, we have to get our money back. How good is the consumer of power in paying the money back? Now, one of the things I will say is that realistically for captive power, and this perhaps goes back to a point that was mentioned earlier, I think for it to be successful, there has to be something economically productive. If you look at the grid, typically the peak power is at 9 p.m. I think, when everyone has their air condition on and is watching NTA. It obviously tells us there's not much economic activity going on our grid. With captive power, if someone is interested in producing chocolate, producing plastics, they want reliable 24/7 power. And in that case, they are a wonderful customer. If someone is a market seller who wants light, they are a reliable customer. If someone is an agro-processor turning cassava into flour, they are a reliable customer. So really it's a question of, from a banking point of view, identifying the creditworthiness of the off-taker. And if that's okay, then what has been demonstrated both by the CBN and even by individual banks is that money will be lent. But it's not as easy as it sounds, finding a reliable customer. And that goes to the challenges and the risk factors. Something that the CBN is looking towards is the idea that if we can find reliable customers, perhaps helping in refinancing, how developers would be able to finance. So the developer will take the risk, would demonstrate that they can generate power, will demonstrate that they can bill, will demonstrate that they can receive cash flows. And in that situation then, it will be possible, or we're looking to provide liquidity facilities where, in essence, you can refinance, just to use a short word, those cash flows as security against a later loan, which should be at, I don't want to assign anything to it, preferential rates, let's just leave it at that. So if the market can demonstrate that these cash flows are secure, both standard bank funding and possibly concessionary rate funding should be available. And even though these are the things that we talk about, challenges and risk factors, from the CBN's perspective, and I guess the banking sector's perspective of the entire market, it's a commercial problem. If we can't get our money back, then it's really hard to see how any bank, whether it's a central bank or whether it's a private bank, is going to lend that money. And as I always say, the Association of Generation Importers have never once asked the CBN for single-digit interest rate. They've never once asked the CBN for cheap FX. But that's because they have a greater hold over getting their money back from their customers than perhaps people in the grid do. So if there are any IPP developers out there, I would say focus on the commercials more so than the technology, which at this stage in 21st century should be pretty much plug and play. Know your customers, know how to get the money back off them, and I'm pretty sure that financing will be available. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ebi. To go ahead, we'll try and discuss on the panel issues that we've been able to raise and look at how we can solve them. Firstly, I want to start with, I'll ask Ebi, then I'll throw it to the rest. What your opinion is about, how embedded generation and captive power kind of clashes with the grid. And to go forward, I'd like us to kind of roll back a bit and put embedded and captive into another bucket. And because what we're talking about is essentially generating for a captive market. Even if that captive market involves some distribution and it's a bit bigger, let's just discuss that kind of scenario. Why I want us to do that is essentially because I want us to also look at situations where we have a captive generator that might have excess capacity and might be willing to dedicate some of that excess capacity to an embedded generation type scenario. So I'll start with him.
Okay. Once again, like I said, I'm not that technical, but if one is imagining merging all these grids embedded, then to me, what I see is some sort of, I don't know, grid intelligence. The ability to say where the power's coming from, how much it costs, and routing that. If you're not too concerned with where the power is being routed from, then you have to be able to identify it and pay for it. Whether it comes from, let's say, the local generator that you're sharing next door, the grid itself, or some other source. I think that's quite a complex thing to do, technically, but there's, no reason why regulation might not get ready for that idea of, I think it's more distributed generation, and whether some of that generation is captive and offloaded to its direct customers or to a wider grid, whether it's embedded or whether it's coming from a wide area network, now becomes irrelevant if there's intelligence in the grid. But I have no idea about intelligent grid regulation.
Thank you. Do you want to take a stab at it?
Sure. I guess the best way to go about this is to share our experience. When we started our project in Abuja, it was for a dedicated area in Abuja. It was a 22 megawatt power plant. From that experience, we were approached by a group in Aba that wanted us to come and provide captive power, i.e. just give them the power they need to run their businesses, their manufacturing enterprises. And once we started talking about that as geometric power, NEPA went up in arms. Why? Because we were labeled as cherry picking their best customers. So from a social perspective, yes, we're going to address a need that would have a multiple effect that would be positive in the market by enabling that group of manufacturers to produce at a lower cost. But they also felt that in doing that, we were taking away a customer that was guaranteeing, income to the organization. Now, play that in today's market, and we'll be talking about the discos. The discos are in their need of having credit-worthy off-takers. So if we now start encouraging cherry-picking, as it were, their best customers and providing captive power to them, it would have a larger effect on the economy that might not be as positive. So that's the area that I struggle with somewhat. To cut the long story short, the solution for us was to now provide power within a ring fence, or change our model to provide power within a ring fence that had the good, the bad, the ugly. We had the industrialists, the commercial off-takers, the rural, and the residential. So you have to deal with all that. And at the end of the day, you find that your top customers end up supporting the lower customers. So the social impact of the embedded generation model is more immediate. You and I, and those of us that have families in the villages, actually benefit from that more than we benefit from the captive. However, the captive has its own strengths and positive outcomes?
I think for us, what we're finding is, I'll use Lagos State as a specific example because most of our work is in there. You talk about captive and embedded. To me, similar to what you're saying, they can overlap a little bit. All right, so for the discos, what they care about mostly is reliability of supply. So you have 11 discos that are out to show that they're good discos and they're running their business as well. Every time the grid collapses and the discos go down and they go dark, it doesn't show them well. So the objective now is how can I show the people that I'm selling power to that I'm reliable? This is where a captive or an embedded now starts to come into play, where you can put an embedded plant within a disco zone and make the embedded plant per se the primary source of power, and grid power as a backup to the embedded power or the captive power, so to speak. The idea there being, the issue has always been, okay, the cherry picking of customers. Let the developer, like Axela, we go into bed with the disco. We're not going to cherry pick your customer. We're going to sit together and face the customer directly. Why? As Ms. Naji has already said, the off-taker credibility is very important. It's important to the disco because they're good payers. It's also important to the developer because that is one of the places you're going to get your bank guarantees or your source of securitization, let's say, to develop the plant in the first place. At the same time, I don't want one off-taker either, because if that one off-taker goes offline, then I'm back at square one. So, which is where this clustering of off-takers now becomes very sexy, if I may use that word, where you have numerous people that are bringing in different lines of bank guarantees, giving you that wiggle room that if one guy falls off, you can still generate and produce. Captive is great if you have a definitive cluster and you're close to a source of gas or fuel. Part of the problems are today, if you try to re-engineer industrial clusters, it's very difficult because everywhere is already spread out. However, if you were to look at it from a captive perspective and you work with the disco, you can now target areas similar to what Ms. Naji is saying, ring fence certain off-takers that you deem to be maximum demand or good credit people, provide the disco, this helps them, provide them with this embedded power that now shores up their reliability of supply, makes them look good. Everybody's happy. And in the event that embedded power goes down, peradventure, you can always fall back on the grid. And that continues to help you look good. There's some issues tied to that, meaning tariff and some other things, but I think the major source of that is on the gas or on the fuel. If we can lower our fuel, we can ultimately improve the end user tariff and hopefully make this a more viable option as a go-forward basis.
In essence, what you're saying is the future grid might not look exactly like it looks like now. It essentially will be a mix.
Yeah, the future grid, you see, one thing I'm very proud of Nigeria is we deregulated our power sector a lot further than anybody else has. Our generation companies, you have some national plants and you have some independent plants. Although the transmission company is still owned by Nigeria, but on the distribution side has also been privatized. What we're going to is a new layer, the next layer, which has to be on the distribution side, having embedded power plants within each disco so they can grow organically. Not everybody grows the same rate. And then on top of that, providing backup fuel to these embedded plants to give grid power. The issue has always been grid power. If you can get or make people believe grid power is not what's powering them and give them that confidence that, hey, look, I'm giving you a different source of power that is reliable and be consistent and is affordable, which is very important. There's a lot of comfort. Now the disco can on-sell the power it's not taking from the grid, or the places that it wasn't serving adequately before can move the power it was serving maybe Nanikoli and take it to Abulemba and sell it, potentially. So that is where the grid network has to go, and this would allow organic growth, industrial cluster growth in certain areas that can, again, fit the price point on the tariff and also have reliable source of input fuel, and hopefully an evacuation source to allow them to sell the power.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, does storage play a part in any of this?
Yeah, so looking at the models I'm looking at today, Lagos State, I'm part of the Light Up Lagos Embedded Power Scheme. And Lagos State has always said we want reliability of gas fuel supply, which is why we're looking at blending pipeline gas with liquefied natural gas. So the idea is to always have 3 to 5 day storage tanks at each of these embedded sites, such that pipeline gas exists, liquefied natural gas exists. If there's ever a shortage in the pipeline gas, you switch immediately to your liquefied gas. Hopefully that gives you enough time such that you can refuel these tanks and hopefully you can get your pipeline back up. The cost of that gas is going to be blended naturally. It will be the pipeline and this alternate source of gas blended. But with time, those costs should ultimately come down and you should be able to create a situation where you have an end user tariff that is sustainable to the future.
How about electricity energy storage, like battery storage at critical points? Or is that not commercially viable?
For me, I don't see that as being commercially viable because of the scale of power we're talking about. We're not talking about if it's a farm or a closed area that you know what your demand is on a day in, day out basis. You can put a solar facility with some backup storage, batteries maybe, but on a commercial level, I don't see that going.
That is still a challenge for now, because it's too expensive and it's not worth it by the time you get the various technologies to get the capacity going. It's not quite there. But there's hope for it, I believe. There's something you said that's very interesting, and that is key to how this captive market can work. And that is working with the discos. It's something that would always be in our focus. We must stay focused on it. Because if our discos do not survive, then it's going to be bad news for everyone, including those that are doing good business with the captive generation. So it would be necessary, I think, for those of us that are in the private sector to maybe work with the policymakers to find out what would be the best strategy and policy for promotion and development of the captive generation market. I mentioned farmlands and farming communities when I spoke earlier. That area is one that needs power to be able to preserve a lot of the produce that comes out of our farms. And until we start doing that, we'll still continue to have challenges in food supply, and the cost of food will continue to vary. So if there was a way of actually going into these rural areas where you have the land and you have the labor available, you can employ lots of people, you can get food going in a way that it is commercially viable, then that aspect would have a very strong impact and positive impact on our social lifestyle.
Speaking to that point, I think there's a focus on having an anchor client to any grid network, and it's a matter of data. And if let's say you have a GIS and you have a plot of where the agriculture is, and you say, right, I'm going to put a tomato processing plant here, then I'm not sure who's really responsible for designing that and perhaps the support and infrastructure of the agricultural value chain, but there does need to be some coordination of it to reach critical mass such that the power project makes sense. It's a gap.
I've been on a farm, the Songhai farm in Benin Republic, where they generate their own power from biomass. It's fascinating and it's doable. They use the waste from everything from corn to the animal waste, everything, to generate that power. And they've actually ended up expanding their power generation capacity for the use of the farm, as well as some other people that kind of needed power, their neighbors and that sort of thing, the school. So it is doable. You just have to kind of scale it to meet the need of that particular location. And guess what? Once you have steady, reliable supply of power within an environment, you end up attracting others to that location. Even if they're not getting the power today, they will enjoy the benefit indirectly. So for us, rather than focus all our energy within an already built up area, strategically, I think we should work with people in the rural areas to grow the market in those areas through captive generation.
Thank you. That made it a bit clearer. So next, I'd like us to look at this scenario, especially when we talk about pricing and just making captive power work if the intention is to improve the economy for Nigeria generally. So part of the kind of problem we see with a lot of captive power generators, going back to the issue with discos, is right now on the grid we see a lot of load rejection, which has to do more with like the infrastructure on ground, so the infrastructural capacity of what we have on ground, which seems to be at like a P-max at this point, like just struggling to cope at this point. Now, what we found that might happen is that if you somehow remove those industrial customers, that pay those manufacturers, let's use a scenario where you have 4,000 megawatts right now. Some of them are not on the grid anyway, but those of them that are using power from the grid, if we suddenly remove about 1,000 megawatts of them, then you're left with 3,000 megawatts. If we power that 1,000 megawatts, it doesn't seem like the existing grid can find what to do with that 1,000 megawatts. It doesn't seem like that 1,000 megawatts will go to other places. And that's part of why discos seem to complain, to say that, well, we're not going to lose these customers. You want us to now go and sell to the people in Maraba who are not going to pay us if you take off all of our customers there. So that seems to be something we might need to solve. It might go back to tariff to make sure that the pricing is right, so there's no issue of having to sell to our two customers in those areas. So that just seems like one of the problems we might need to solve. Jide.
You bring up a good point. So today, all the 11 distribution companies in Nigeria have a contract to take a certain percentage of load from the national grid. So I don't know the exact numbers, but EcoDisco maybe between 10 and 11% of total generated capacity they must buy as part of a go-forward basis. So if I have to use what you're saying, let me use an example. Let's say EcoDisco takes 4,000 megawatts off the grid and must sell 4,000 within its network, and is able to, 400, sorry, and is able to sell 400 today. And here comes along some industrial, some cluster, captive cluster, and says, hey, I can take 50 megawatts into this captive network, which is 50 less that the disco can sell to earn to make money. Now, I said it earlier where if you're going to go into this sort of situation, I'll use embedded because I think it's more apt in this case. You go in with the disco, right? Now, going in with the disco, you're trying to assure the disco that it's not necessarily going to lose any revenue. Now, the disco will have sections of its network that it's being underserved today. It must, because everywhere is not getting 100% power. This now gives the disco the ability to wheel the 50 megawatts to another area that maybe they weren't able to adequately supply. And maybe it gives them the opportunity now to improve the distribution network, to improve collections, because it's all about collections at the end of the day. what is the rate of collections in certain areas. And the whole point of, part of the whole point of getting a prepaid meter and getting paid is, when I load my meter with 20,000 naira, the disco has my 20,000 naira, but they have not supplied me with 20,000 naira worth of energy today, instantaneously. Now you have entire groups of people buying credit and giving the disco money ahead, and the disco is giving you a promissory note of sorts to say, I will deliver power to your meter when you need it. The whole point, or part of that money, is to improve your infrastructure, your distribution infrastructure, such that you can expand where you're not collecting adequately today, hopefully improve that network such that when you do send power to that part of town, you're able to get your collections and then make your money. So yes, there is some gaps, but I think if we're working very closely with the DISCO, and I flag the Light Up Lagos initiative that we're doing in Lagos, where the state understands the DISCO is not an enforcement agency, for example. The DISCO can only take you to court. They can't enforce anything. But if you bring the state, the power of the state into the picture, the state can now create task force that can now be an enforcer and help the DISCO collect the revenues that it expects to get. So there are different models we can look at that can work. And in Lagos, we're creating a framework, and I'll say Excel is championing a structure that can allow the DISCOs to continue to make their money, allow them to continue to expand the areas which they can provide power, and hopefully improve the distribution networks to people that are not adequately being served.
Yes. What's the role of the regulator in all this?
We were able to get a
How
vote
can they help to make this work properly?
We got a vote of confidence from the regulator, from Light Up Lagos. They gave no objection, which means that it's up to the players. We have to make this commercial. The players need to get in, get rough and dirty, and figure it out. Because I think the ability to pay exists. The issue really is people are jaded with paying for power, like I said, upfront, and then your meter is dark. So if the paradigm can change, that if you do pay your meter, and the power is always going to be at the end of your meter every time, then the confidence comes in, and we can improve the network on a go-forward basis.
The reason I asked is because what you've described in Lagos is a model that should be replicated everywhere.
I agree.
But we must have the political will to do it and do it right, across board.
Yeah.
And that's where we're having a challenge with the power industry today. The issue of cherry picking, the issue of allowing certain people to do things in a way that is not absolutely the right way is not good for the industry. So, as private investors and developers in the market, I think we need to figure out how to make the model he's talking about work across the 11 DISCOs, such that the DISCOs can be a sustainable business on their own, and you and I can benefit from it in the long run.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, I would agree very much with what you've said. I think the issues of the market go well beyond tariff. They go into incentive design and market behavior. And realistically, for a lot of the behaviors that need to be monitored and enforced, local actors are much better for doing that. It's as simple as that. And once you get the behaviors that you expect, you get the outcomes that you expect. You know, it really is as simple as that. I think that there are issues of tariff design, and what's happened is that because the incentive design is not correct, all these exceptional circumstances have been created to try to change the behavior, alignment of actors to do certain things. The outcomes do tend to follow. I'm trying to couch that very politically. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ebi. To wrap this up very quickly so we can take questions from the audience. I also agree with you guys, and I agree with Ebi, especially with the tariff. So if the regulator did more to make it easier, you know, for embedded generators and captive power generators to do what they need to do, to make it more, to give more incentive. More will happen. We'll start to see situations where, before I joined the government, I used to wonder why captive power generators that had excess capacity, so the Lafarges and the likes, could not sell that excess power. And we came to find out that the right regulations for them to do that were not in place. At some point it was illegal to do it, and NERC did some work to create IETNs and all of that. But once the tariff is not there, and you're still going to get, you're having stocks every day, go and get in Lagos, but a lot of other discos, is a big issue in some places where the manufacturers are paying close to 45 naira, and R2 is still in some cases in the 20s. Cherry picking that 45 naira away and asking the disco to then go and expand and distribute.
The truth is, at some point, and I hope it's soon, and the regulator knows this, the MITO tariffs need to be revised. There's no way the embedded generator or the captive guy that wants to sell potentially to others can compete if local people are saying, when I say local, just normal consumers of power are saying, why do I need to tap to this embedded guaranteed 24/7 power that I've never experienced anyway, and pay more money? So consumers' pockets are inelastic. This is the real truth. Their pockets are inelastic, and you're saying today they're used to a pattern where there's a certain amount of their earnings that is going towards their power. And that is as much as they're willing to pay for power today. All of a sudden, you may give them more power, but their pocket's not expanding. So they're still going to pay for the same amount of power that they have. So going back to what he was saying, which is on the behavior has to change, where if you don't want your power to run, go to your main disconnect switch and turn it off. Don't rely on NEPA to cut it off for you, which is what we've been relying on. Government regulates power for us. They take power away and say, oh, power's gone. But the behavior has to change, where if you know you don't need that power, cut it off. I was on, I forget where I was going, to Open State, somewhere I was driving in the afternoon, probably 3 in the afternoon, and there were lights lit everywhere, buildings. These are little low-income kind of situation where I know they probably don't need that light on, but the lights are on. Because the behavior hasn't changed, where power is free, and it's national power, therefore it's mine.
And because they're unmetered.
Correct. So we need to help change the citizenry in how they perceive power, and how power is in your control and not being controlled for you. So some of those things have to change.
A lot of investment needs to be done on the infrastructure. The discos need to raise the money, and unfortunately, my understanding is that after the privatization exercise happened, a lot of the inflow that was expected just didn't make it into our borders for whatever reasons. So they're a bit cash strapped, and that's why I keep emphasizing on finding a solution that would enable them to make enough revenue to invest in the infrastructure. We must build a lot of substations and overhead lines and transformers and meters that would guarantee reliable supply of power to that off-taker. At the moment, it can come into the disco, but it can't reach that final off-taker because you have this cobweb of wires that tend to lose maybe more than half of the generated capacity. So someone somewhere has to take care of that loss. So in terms of the behavior, that ability, it's a bit of a chicken and egg, but the ability for the discos to invest and improve the network would enable the end user change his behavior, knowing that he's going to be having more reliable power supply. He needs to turn off his switches before he leaves the house. The people you saw that had lights on, maybe they left home while the power was out, and somebody didn't remember to switch off the lights. and that then happens. And at the end of the day, we're still talking a lot about estimated billing, which has created a lot of resentment in the marketplace. So these are all issues that we really should get together as stakeholders in the industry to help our discos to resolve this problem. I don't see much challenge within the generation arena. The disco is where we have our weakest link.
Thank you. We cannot take questions from the audience.
Mr. Jafar, I'm the Commissioner for Water Resources and Energy from Plateau State. Mine is a question, I don't know, probably to the organizers. I understand this is probably the 6th or 10th dialogue you're having, so this question may be silly.
I think there have been 20 or 20 something.
20 something. But this is the first time I'm coming up one, and I like what is happening. I want to ask about how much you are involving government in this dialogue. Some of the things, the comments you are making, some of the questions that are on the minds of people, and some of the things you are saying are things that probably could have been answered easily if we had some government participants. In this sector, you know, government serves both as a consumer, a customer to the generators, and also a regulator, and then policymakers to create an enabling environment for investors to invest in the sector. So on these three platforms, it is necessary to have government participate here. NERC, as you mentioned, has done quite a lot of things to encourage relationships between captive generators and discos. You mentioned the IDN, which is really a good thing, a recent development, but it's a good development for us in the county. It removes the fear that the discos have of being their customers being cherry-picked. There's something Madam said, is something we are doing as a strategy in Plateau State, which is to look at the dark areas, the places that are not now very attractive to the discos, and creating the environment as a government for investors to go in there. For instance, for rural clusters, we have identified about 553 clusters for off-grid solutions using different technologies depending on what they have. As a state, we are lucky to have all kinds of renewable sources, water, wind, and solar, and biomass as well. So we have tried, we have put 2 pilots which we have commissioned already. They have worked for about 7 months now. We don't have any major issues yet coming from that. We thought that villagers would not be able to pay. But what happened in the communication sector is what happened with this people. Apparently, the cost of darkness seems to be much higher than the 2-3 times of the tariff that they have to pay. They are paying 60-70 naira as against 29 naira or so. And they are doing it happily. Mainly because their needs, their power needs are also small. And then secondly because as they are there, some other things are happening. The economies have been advanced, the rural economies are growing. The cost of land, everything is beginning to expand. The villages have grown in 6 months to levels that you couldn't have imagined. These things do work. Please, let's get the government involved so that they will tell you the things they are doing. In Plateau State, for instance, the strategy is good. And I welcome investors who are interested in coming to the States.
Thank you, moderator and the panelists. My name is Gabriel Eosase. I'm a legal and utility regulation specialist. I want to appreciate the panelists that as they gave their lecture or conversations, my mind was concerned with the legal and the regulation side of the discussion. There is a regulation that governs captive generation in this country. And that regulation makes it mandatory for any captive generator. In fact, captive generation is defined as the generation of power that is in excess of 1 megawatt for use of the generator and not to be sold to third parties. That is the strict definition of captive generation. Now, this discussion tends to drift, towards embedded generation, That's what I have gathered. Now, if we are going to narrow down the discussion to this definition, by law, then we are confronted with regulation, regulatory issues. First, for a captive generator to sell surplus, consent of the regulator has to be obtained. And if he's going to sell beyond 1 megawatt, then he has to obtain a license so that the regulatory ambit, full regulatory ambit, can be brought onto his operations. And now in this case, we're going to be talking about issues of tariff, issues of, spread, because we know that discos have territorial, jurisdictions, over the franchise areas. And so I think that we need to, put a scope, to this discussion so that we will understand clearly how captive generation can unlock. Now, this is a very big question. The topic we're actually discussing is captive generation. Will it unlock Nigeria's economy? Now, that's a very big question. If you asked me to answer that question directly without having to look at so many issues, my answer is probably going to be no. That's going to be my answer. No, because number one, there is, sorry, I'm mindful of time. I'm just going to make this sentence and that will be all.
Okay.
Yes. I'm mindful of the scope of generation of captive generators. And so unless we find that we're going to multiply captive generators all over the place, the impact on the economy is not going to be that huge. That's where I want to rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you. One more then.
I work for government. Actually, I came here a bit concerned when I saw the title of the conversation. But Mrs. Najiri helped to give a lot of attention. And the gentleman there has just spoken a good part of my mind. And so, just like he said, the answer to this question is no. The question or the topic that was based on the rules we have today. And part of that is supposed to be this issue around cherry picking, and is in fact around the sustainability of the whole system. When you begin to unravel, then it gets into the unsustainable sector. So I was a bit worried that the question was, is this the conversation we should be having? More around, expecting that we should be having conversations that are dealing with the problems we have, than trying to create more confusion within the confusion we already have. So that's my question. Is this the conversation we should be having?
Since that question is similar to the...
My name is Ernest. I know some people here say I'm still on my head. I'm getting a little bit agitated each time these discussions come. Today, I faced baptism of fire. Where I'm coming from, because we are discussing power trading policy. I want to ask the banker, when you talk about attitude, what is the attitude of bankers in Nigeria about development? Is it to say, you've spoken Queen's English here, abroad, don't they invest in development projects? What will it take the banks to invest and get people that will get this power are valuable to consumers? The man in Plateau State, I share his views. I have been working on electricity at the community level, and I know people are willing to pay. It's blackmail when we say people are not willing to pay tariff. It's the blackmail of the discos and the bankers. Because right now, if you check what happens in Nigeria, all the civil society organizations are encouraged to begin to advocate on issues of power so that NEC will sit up and so that stakeholders in the power sector will sit up. What is happening is that NEC is in marriage with discos. And nobody, because foreigners are the ones funding civil society organizations in Nigeria, and they are the investors in the power sector. So they won't fund you to go and challenge these people. So the sector remains the way it is. So my issue is this: has there been any coordination? Where is the data to prove some of the things we are saying? Because in communities where young men are willing to work, they have no power. You can't tell me that if they are coordinated and meant to know the value that will come from it, that they will not pay. But the thing is, banks are more interested. They voted 25 billion on encouraging digital banking. Where you will now put in your ATM card, they will deduct your money and not give you the cash. You take 2 weeks to get the money back. Check if 1 million Nigerians are made to lose 20,000 in a day, and they lose it and give them back this money in 2 weeks. The banks may have mopped up money for other purposes, whereas the same people, they are mopping up their money in a criminal way and looking for power to work, and they are not willing to invest in that area. So my issue here is, I don't know whether power dialogue organizers will one day dedicate issues to consumers and then look at this as a critical form. Why is there no consumer enumeration? How many metered consumers exist in Nigeria, and how many unmetered consumers, and how much is generated from them? Why is the state government kept away in the discourse? Each time you talk about bringing in state governments and local government councils, the discourse will quickly say power is a national issue, but they collect the money at the local governments, they collect at the states. So why would the Minister of Power in the state not be made to know the regulation and then be able to mobilize the citizenry there to invest in power? Let me just leave it here.
Thank you. Talk about this dialogue myself. But I'm aware that it's been on for quite some time, and there have been several speakers. NEC, I've watched past videos. NEC has come, TCN, people from the ministry. You know, it's been quite engaging, and it seems like both of us are from the government, so even this time around, the purpose of this thing is to talk about those issues and not put it out to people who might have ideas. We put together everything, submit some kind of communique to the minister to look at, like, people sat down and honestly discuss these issues, you know, and people are dedicating their time to solve it every time, but just talk about it, you know, look at where the problems are and try and get this. That's the essence of this thing. But I'll let my colleagues add to it.
Okay, if you don't mind, I know there are different questions. The gentleman to my left, I forget his name, Gabriel, I think. Gabriel. Gabriel had said, in other words, let's be more focused on captive power, because that's what this talk is about. That's what the panel has been brought up for, and we're diverging a little bit into embedded power. Understood. Now, captive power can be effective, and I think I brushed on it earlier when I started my discussion, when I said, for example, we were able to build a captive power plant for the Water Corporation in Lagos. Building a power plant for the Water Corporation in Lagos brought more water to the citizenry of Lagos than ever before. And we did it on the back of the revenues that were coming from the Water Corporation itself. Today, it self-sustains its own power plant. The power plant produces enough water for everybody and generates extra money for the state for their coffers. So if captive power can be targeted specifically to areas of priority state by state first, I think you will see more of how it pays back to the state than any other form of power. It must be targeted. And you must look at, I don't know, some states maybe are good in textiles. Focus your captive power in the textile industry. Hopefully the revenues from selling the textiles will pay for the power plant itself, and over time generate more revenues for that state, and so on and so forth. So captive power can work, and if it's targeted specifically to something that generates revenues, I think it can be self-sustained. I don't want to go into some of the other things that have been said. I don't think the discos and the bankers are in bed with each other. I don't think that's the case. I think what you're finding is, if I may speak as an engineer, which I am originally, all the equipment, technical equipment that is used to generate power is not manufactured in Nigeria. And unfortunately, they're manufactured overseas. And these technologies cost money, and they're not priced in Naira. They're priced in foreign currency, dollars usually. And if you're looking for money to fund, to pay for these things, we collect, people pay, you and I pay for NEPA in Naira. We do not pay in dollars. And financing, unfortunately, you have a mix of financing, either in Naira or in dollars. And in either case, most of the technology is in dollars, you must pay for it in dollars. Now you're exposed to foreign exchange risk, which you must hedge, and there's a cost to all these things, which is what ultimately drives the price of power. I don't think they're in collusion, I just think it's just a matter of how things are in the world today.
Well, from an investor's perspective, captive power works. You make your money back.
Yeah.
But if you're looking again at the big picture, captive power has to be, and I totally agree with you, it has to be targeted. It has to be strategic. Otherwise, we'll be shooting ourselves in the foot. Honorable Commissioner, what you're doing in Plateau State is admirable. The challenge I have each time I hear government, that word, it's a bit scary.
Can I clarify that?
And I will tell you why. Government is made up of individuals. If you're lucky, you have individuals that are very committed in serving the people, which is what they're supposed to be doing. If you're lucky, you have people in government, in responsible positions, who know, who have the capacity, who have the skill set that is required to deliver on their responsibilities and their scope of work. However, no matter how good that person is, they have a limited tenure. So politics drives a lot of the decision making that comes out of government. The tenure of 4 years, and then they start all over again to seek a new mandate, does not help us when it comes to taking sustainable decisions. So you find out someone today will start something good that would be good for the people, but tomorrow someone else comes up with a policy that is targeted at getting the votes the following year because it's an election year. So yes, we need to get government on board. However, government really cannot drive this train sustainably. So we must have a way of getting us in this room as stakeholders to take the decisions and chase after whoever is in government, whoever is in that position, use our voice to teach them what needs to be done in order to deliver to our people going forward the right products and the right decisions that would impact us socially. Our industries today have suffered. I remember years ago there was a gentleman that started a flower company, a flower farm in Jos. Beautiful place. Today, that company is dead. But they were exporting flowers, beautiful roses, to abroad actually, and they were making the money. But just a little policy of government that had to do with importation and the challenges they had bringing in these imported items for their, I think for their greenhouses or something very silly, that ruined that business, and with it, down the drain went the livelihood of so many people that were dependent on that business. So yes, it's important that we have the right people in the right places in government, but we who have a longer stake in the business must find a way to hold them and make them responsible, make them accountable for the decisions they take. So I applaud what you're doing in Plateau State. The idea of going to the rural areas and developing farms is great. It helps everybody, including the farmers and you and I. The other thing it does is that it gives the farmers in the rural areas the opportunity to use their farmlands to create maybe cooperatives, because as you and I know, the state quote-unquote owns the land, but there are pieces of land that are usually family owned, but they are not large enough for people to now invest in commercial farming. So if we find people that are interested in a community, we can then work with the state government at that time to enable them to have a large expanse of land that they can use to establish a commercial venture. That would work. But government should not be the owner of that land. They should not take it away from the villagers that actually own it. If the villagers continue to own the land and have some skin in the game as far as that investment is concerned, you will find out that they will remain interested in ensuring the success of that project for life. But if it is owned by the government, as soon as election time comes, people will be struggling to take the profit from that business to go and run politics. And that is where I get nervous when we try to put a lot in the hands of government.
Thank you. Debbie, are you in bed with disco?
I don't know really where to start with. There's a lot of complaints about the electricity market. Do not get me wrong, but I still stick to this point. It's a market, or it should be a market, and markets at one level are very simple. You're asking for data. I think there was an energy audit done of Lagos on self-generation, and it was, how much? Was it 16 gigawatts of self-generation from I Pass My Neighbor to gas IPPs. 16 gigawatts of self-generation. That tells me people can pay. I mean, there's no two ways about it. People can pay, and people are prepared to pay. However, from the grid, which is government's involvement, Lagos will be lucky to get 800 megawatts on a good day. There's something wrong in this market. You have 800 megawatts that you're selling at 10 cents to 20 cents. And blame the banks. No one is paying. No one is paying. You have 16,000 megawatts that's been sold at 40 to 70 cents. And a bank will give you a loan to bring in a generation from China. The market does not work. It's very simple. It has to be designed so it works. And the real fundamental question is, how do you share 4,000 megawatts across a country the size of France and Germany and get your money back? And if you can't solve that, and if government can't solve that, we have a problem. We have people that are prepared to pay. We have mini-grid people who pay an exorbitant price per kilowatt hour. But you have to be prepared to pay. And the solution to that, I'm sorry, will come from from entrepreneurs. It will not come from government. It will not come from government. So until the entrepreneurs are allowed to create solutions where they capture people who are willing to pay, and I think even if you look at the Lumos, system on a per kilowatt hour basis, it's an exorbitant price. People will pay to get out of darkness very high prices, but you need commercial solutions that extract that money and get it back. And I'm sorry, the grid from TCN going back to the GenCos attached to ELPS is not a system that works reliably. So other solutions have to come into place. And I fundamentally believe, going back to my incentive thing, that I do not understand why villagers from Ondo come to Abuja to complain to NERC, why Benin Disco complains about customers in their kitty, when there are commissioners of energy just sitting there, who know which villagers pay, who know who's reliable, who know how much they want from their IGR. The incentive design of the market could be better, let's put it that way. It could be a lot better by changing who's responsible for which role. And I remember a discussion that then Governor Fashola said when we were at the task force, which is the revenue of Nigeria depends upon the cost of oil. The revenue of Lagos depends upon power. He could literally see when his IGR was going out the window when TCN grid turned off, because everyone then switches to generators and his IGR drops. So if a governor can feel the pinch, should they not be doing more? Should they not be involved more in distribution? That's what I fundamentally think. They've got a greater stake in it.
Eddie, if I may jump in. Government still owns 40% of the discos.
I'm not disagreeing. Which government?
Exactly.
Which government?
How are they utilizing? 40% anywhere is a huge investment. So who is making the decision on behalf of government in those discos?
I made a very simple point.
So,
is the deputy director in Abuja really going to figure out who's not paying bills in Calabar? Is he really going to figure that out? He's not going to figure it out.
No,
After all, the states have got shares in in NDPHC, TCN, that they perhaps don't feel as much ownership over.
one of the things that could help is for government to actually nominate people on the board of those entities where they own shares and they're working with entrepreneurs. They look for entrepreneurs within their state who are knowledgeable to represent them on the board. That way, proper discussions and decisions can be made. I don't see why that could be a solution, but then the unfortunate thing is that a lot of the political appointments are based on party membership.
I'm a governor trying to get my IGR, and I know that whether this disco produces, power means these productive enterprises are not using diesel. I want to be on that board.
Yeah, I'm going to jump right in and go right to Light Up Lagos, because this is exactly what the state saw. And the state, totally today, all Lagos state agencies, parastatals, government, they do not run on a coal or Ikeja disco power. They run on self-generated power. And Lagos has been independent of power since Fashola, so like 7 years. And what the state has seen is, I can self-generate power for myself to consume in my government buildings, and I can as well generate for my state, for my people, which is where the Light Up Lagos initiative is going, where we can say, hey, we can potentially embed power plants around certain areas that we can evacuate power. And this Lagos State is taking the initiative to go in on the fuel side as well with the EPLA and provide backup or supplementary fuel to some of these power plants, such that it can help, working with the DISCO, provide power for the state. Because as you said, Lagos is very commercial, and any ounce of power that we get just increases the revenues to the state.
Lagos had the right governor with the right team, making the right decisions at the right time. And they were fortunate enough to have another governor follow up continue where the previous one stopped as far as power generation is concerned, as far as keeping an eye on the internally generated revenue. How many of our leaders are interested in that? So you and I need to go and vote for people that understand the business, because without that, we'll end up having to just regurgitate the same discussions over and over again.
Okay.
It might be time for the...
Thank you. We can take one or two more questions, but this time around, you know how they do in churches, so if you talk too much, the usher should just withdraw the mic.
As I work with Mahmoud and Co. I read a blog written by Richard Branson, where he spoke extensively about the off-grid market we have in Nigeria and the potential of the coming here, and today's topic is actually on how we can actually use captive generation and to unlock the Nigerian market economy. Yes. So I'm just trying to know what the government is doing actually to support the investors, and what are we going to make. I'm seeing even Richard Russell feel like he needs to write on this market, to show how wide this market is. And what are we doing generally to actually market the off-grid to investors? Thank you.
From extractive industries. Basically, I would want to ask a question about targeting industrial areas. So obviously, at Bahrain, Lagos, Idu, here in Abuja, I have a factory that processes castor into castor oil. We're in a $50 billion industry. And most of our money now, overhead, is going to go into power generation. Why can't we target captive generation in areas like that? Speak to businesses. They know how much they spend every month on diesel alone, even when diesel is available. So you already have a ready market that is ready to pay premium naira for electricity, even if you're giving us 12 hours uninterrupted doing work. If we can do that, we can now start talking about growing the economy or touching people further down the line. But as for me, industrial areas, places that really go into working out and paying top dollar for electricity. Thank you.
Okay. Also, you also have a redundant backup grid system that can be there in the event that the embedded plant goes down. Now, most of the time, it's planned shutdowns and things of that nature. We don't expect it to go down for any other reason. But in the event it may do that on the fuel side, I said it earlier that we're again looking to diversify that fuel supply. So instead of just pipeline fuel gas, we are looking at bringing in liquefied natural gas. We have a mini LNG project in Ajaokuta that we're working on. FID is scheduled for early H1 next year, where we're looking to provide liquefied natural gas as an alternate form of fuel for the northern markets and for any other gas-based IPP that may need to blend some of this fuel such that if pipeline goes away, it has a backup. So we're looking for a solution for your type of company and for others as well.
Thank you. I think we have time for 2 more questions, then we wrap this up very quickly.
Hello, good evening everyone. My name is Joy Odaji. The question I think goes to...
Sorry, who do you represent?
I represent the power sector. I'm speaking as a Nigerian now. I thank all the speakers. You have spoken very well, and most of you have spoken from experiences. It's quite informative and educative to me personally. I'm sure to a lot more people here. We've understood more about the viability in terms of financing and otherwise of the captive generation. However, like I said, representing the power sector, I am puzzled because most of the currently existing generation companies have, especially the legacy plants, they have a performance agreement with BP, which is tied to a capacity recovery timeline. Now that I'm hearing so many embedded generation here, captive generation here, I wonder how these gencos who have signed up performance agreements and are tied to fulfilling those recoveries will meet up their targets. Also, they also have licensing terms running into about 20 years and some beyond to be able to increase generation and expand their capacity. Because all I've heard today is all about making grid power very unattractive. So that is all I heard. Please don't blame me, but that's what I heard. It's all about the grid is not stable, it's not reliable. Any power that comes from the grid is not reliable. I think what I want to hear is, why is the grid not reliable? And the fact that power from the grid, why can't it be made reliable? Should we send those investors packing so that we all have captive generation? Because I'm also thinking of having my own personal captive generation plant. So those are my questions.
My name is Brian. I'm a student of energy economics.
Student of?
I'm a student of energy economics. Okay. I deliberately came here. What the challenge I face is in my research data. It's like we can't make progress without having data. And it's obvious that we do not have data as regards this renewable energy or captive thing that we're talking about. That's the challenge I face in mind. And then, what are we doing about the regulation? Since the definition of captive power generation is anything less than 1 megawatt, right? So, anything less, but anything above that, yeah. So, how can we begin to fine-tune our regulation, renewable energy regulation, to attract investors to do more? Because I am picking up from his discussion. And then, so basically just tell me where find data, statistics. How can you put it up in the public, right? So that they could be able to see things for themselves. It's about the numbers. Because Nigerians are not seeing the numbers. If you tell me it's 20 naira, how would you give me the statistics? Okay, this is how much it cost me doing diesel, doing solar, or doing biomass and the rest. So I need to see the numbers. I was hoping to come and see some slides here that will show me some graphs and stuff like that, but it's okay. But that's my question.
When I started, I said, you know, I liked us to relax the definition of captive power a bit. The reason is because the essence of this conversation is get power to people's houses, get power to industry, let people have lights in their houses. That's the essence. So what you're asking about captive power and capacity is, even if you were larger, as long as you were using it for yourself, you never could define it as captive power. So whether you were smaller than 1 megawatt or you were larger, you know, but captive power would mean that you only used it for yourself and you did not have a trading license, so you were not selling the power to a third party. But NERC has come up with other regulations like the IETN and embedded generation. People are talking about willing buyer, willing seller. A lot of conversation has been going on about as to getting the power out to people who want to consume it. Now, why I asked us to relax that definition a bit was to allow us to think about, you know, embedded generation also, getting that guy with excess capacity in his captive power, getting that power out and, you know, getting it to contribute to the larger economy as a whole. So I just wanted to add that for the context of, you know, this conversation is to talk about those issues and see how we can. I'm sure NERC has been here before to talk about metering and regulation and stuff, and there are other conversations that will still happen in the past. But this particular conversation is for us to talk about, you know, generation, captive generation, embedded generation. I don't know if you want to.
Well, I know the lady was saying that we're talking about captive and not grid power. I mean, the topic was focusing on how we can leverage captive power to unravel the economy. So maybe a lot of what you're hearing is because of the topic. Nobody's saying grid power is not stable or it's not good. It's good, it's cheap, it comes at a good tariff rate. The issue is the transmission of that power to the end users and the ability to distribute that power to end users effectively. I think that those are the issues with grid power. And what we're trying to say here is it can be supplemented with either embedded or captive power generation.
We got a solution.
If I may piggyback on what you just said, there's some solution that could be helpful. Long term, grid power is the way to go.
Okay.
It's the cheapest, it should be the most reliable. Think about it. Any one of us in this room that owns a generator, even if it's, I beat past my neighbor, is operating as a captive power generator.
Is that correct?
Yes. Okay? Yes, it might be smaller than 1 megawatt, but you are generating electricity for your own use. That's really putting it in a simple form. When we did the study in Aba, we found out that there were over 80,000 generators in Aba, largely diesel fueled. So you can imagine the impact on the environment. Interestingly, they paid an average of 209 million naira a week for fuel. When you check that against the tariff that you would charge that same off-taker if you're getting power from the grid, you'll find out that it's a matter of time before everybody goes back to buying from the grid, provided that that weak link of the distribution network is fixed. Once it is fixed and power from the grid can actually get to the end user, that entire value chain works, as in you deliver power to the end user and you can collect your money. Then you'll be sure that the guys that are generating power and putting it on the grid will continue to grow their business. And more people will then invest in that.
Many of those embedded generators will become grid.
Exactly.
Will join the grid
So
also.
the captive market is only for this limited period because the cost of running it is going to be much higher and it won't be as competitive as the grid power when that time comes. So yes, in terms of what it can do for us today, there are some positives. But the guys that made the investments are the ones that are laughing to the banks. Not you and I, who have to pay for the services or the products of those that use captive power. But as of today, it is essential. We can't do without captive power. So from captive to embedded, from embedded to grid, I think that's the way it will all pan out eventually.
So I think from all your answers, then we should suspend the performance agreement of all the Gencos until we get to that level. Don't you think so?
No. I mean, I think, Joy, I think fixed line broadband will probably get to our houses as a little before reliable grid does. It's possible. It's possible, but I'm not holding my breath for it.
When we know where the weak point is, it's right that we should all focus on helping whoever that gap is, creating that gap to solve the problem. And at this point, it is the discos.
Yeah.
So how do we help the discos to become stronger and better so that the guys powering the grid would actually get their money back? So that people that are now taking advantage of the gaps within the distribution system would no longer have a credible market that they would go to and cherry pick their customers from. So we all need to look at how to support, work with the discos to get their business going.
Thank you. To quickly, I remember you asked about data. So we have like mypower.ng. If you go to mypower.ng, you'll see a lot of work done from out of the Office of the Vice President, where we try and put out a lot of the industry data. There's also Nigeria. Yes, so Nextier has now become mypower.ng.
Oh, is that?
Yes. Okay. There's also Nigeria Electricity Hub, I think run by Nextier. It's also very, you can subscribe to the newsletters I get every day. They have a lot of, a lot of industry stats and data that come out of that every day. I think we should wrap up now. I want to thank everybody for
there's
coming.
the REA.
Yes.
Have a GIS of the entire country,
yes.
of where the energy demand is. About the energy demand of where the country.
All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure we've had an exciting time today. My name is Wesley Igbo, and I'm a communications analyst with Credo Advisory. And it's been an amazing evening. We've had a lot of exciting contributions, and contributions certain to move the sector forward. Basically in terms of captive generation as a solution to the existing problems we have. And then to express my immense gratitude to everyone who has put in effort to make this event a success. Nextier Power Dialogue started about this time 2 years ago, July precisely, and it has continued to wax strong, growing from strength to strength in basically every segment, from the topics to the segments to everywhere. It's been growth all the way. And then we're also proud to say that policies that we have advocated via this medium have created ample business opportunities for everyone. And I believe that's a plus that we should all be very happy about. I want to thank the audience, our esteemed guests, for being very attentive, for asking very informed questions that have brought about solutions to the problems we have in the sector. Well, I also like to let us know that it's not only about the dialogue, discussing ideas that will provide solutions, but to translate the solutions into actions that would improve the sector generally. Then I'd like to thank our seasoned panelists. You've been very, 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 amazing in providing these ideas that we need to work on to improve the sector, especially on this topic that we've very much dissected today, captive generation as a way to open up the economy to bloom. And then to the members of the press here present, I'd like to thank you for gracing this event, as we also hope that you present the dialogue in the most positive light possible to ensure that the work that we do here actually moves us forward, because I'm sure we all acknowledge the effect of the media in events like this, Yeah, so the next dialogue would hold in July 18 this year, and it will be a milestone event because that would mark exactly 2 years of Nextier Power Dialogue flying. I think we should give a round of applause for that. It's an effort that we should be very grateful for. And then we thank all our partners and sponsors. MacArthur Foundation, they are our largest supporters of this event. They've been amazing every step of the way. They've provided us every single amount of support that we need to make this a reality. I want to thank MacArthur especially for that. And then I'd also like to draw your attention to the Nigeria Electricity Hub newsletter that we roll out on a daily basis. It provides a daily digest of happenings within the sector. It's something that I think you want to read to keep yourself informed with everything happening within the sector. There are refreshments at the back. You may want to treat yourself to some of that. I haven't had a long evening listening and talking and all of that. I'm sure we are famished to an extent. We'd like to do that. I'd also like to remind us to please drop our tags with the ushers as we step out. Okay? Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for coming, and see you next time. Good night.